Coming up in all angles, Michael Gale, mentally ill, viciously beaten to death. But who beat him was a problem. Police and soldiers, no one held responsible. 20 years on, what's changed and what's not? Thank you so much for joining us for another edition of All Angles. I'm Dion Jackson Miller, and indeed, as we've said, 20 years to the day that Michael Gale was viciously beaten at that police roadblock. We're going to be talking to our guests in studio a little later on in the program. We have with us attorney at law Richard Small. We also have Caroline Gomes, former executive director of Jamaicans for Justice, a human rights group that championed the cause, and with us as well from Indicom, Director of Complaints, Errol Shatu. Now, before we go to our guests, though, earlier today I sat with Mr. Ham, who is Michael Gale's brother, to get his recollection and his thoughts on this 20th anniversary.
It was the story which made headlines in 1999. The death of 26-year-old Michael Gale, who was brutally beaten by members of the security forces after he attempted to cross a roadblock in Olympic Gardens on August 21, 1999. Gale, who was mentally ill, died in the Kingston Public Hospital days after he complained about feeling ill while in police lockup. The police said he was taken into custody after the confrontation and was charged for resisting arrest and assaulting an officer. Mr. Gale's death sparked outrage throughout the Olympic Gardens community at the time. On August 24, 1999, people from the community took to the streets in protest. Mr. Gale's brother Edward Ham told the Gleaner that his sibling was beaten by the soldiers and police. Mr. Ham also indicated that his brother had bruises all over his body. Human rights advocacy group Jamaicans for Justice also took an interest. The group, which had only just been formed, called for a coroner's inquest into Mr. Gale's death. At the time, spokesperson for JFJ, Dr. Caroline Gomes, said there were a series of questions which she needed answered.
Issues about the legality and how cordons and searches are held, how they're announced, how are the people in the neighborhood warned, because perhaps if Michael had been warned, he wouldn't have been out there. His family would have kept him at home. Issues about the security forces and how they handle persons, the severity of the beating that they inflicted on him, what training, what techniques are they given to deal with crowd control as opposed to savagely beating somebody.
The coroner's inquest began on December 6, 1999.
Queen's Counsel Hugh Small, who is representing Michael Gale's family at the coroner's inquest into his death on August 23, spent this morning cross-examining the ground commander in charge of the curfew in Olympic Gardens on the night of August 21. Deputy Superintendent Fillmore Bennett. Mr. Small then asked Mr. Bennett if what had taken place on the night of August 21 had amounted to interfering in the people's freedom in Olympic Gardens. Mr. Bennett thought long and hard before replying yes.
Members of the 12-strong jury were visibly upset and too cried as Michael Gale's mother Jenny Cameron told the fourth day of the coroner's inquest what she had witnessed on the night of August 21. According to Ms. Cameron, Michael had left her home at around 7:30 that evening to see a friend. He had just secured a job as a mason and told her he wanted to pass a message to his new employers to reserve some extra tasks for him.
On December 23 that same year, the jury returned a majority verdict that all the members of the security forces who were at the intersection of Sterling Avenue and Olympic Way on the night when Michael Gale was viciously beaten should be charged with manslaughter. But the decision on who should have been charged was placed in the hands of this man, then Director of Public Prosecutions, Kent Pantry. He ruled that there was insufficient evidence to hold any police or military personnel responsible for Mr. Gill's death. Again, there was outrage. Amnesty International launched a broadside against the DPP. In a statement, the group said it feared the DPP's decision implies that either the police investigation was inadequate or the DPP was reluctant to prosecute members of the security forces. In 2002, the JFJ brought the issue to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. 3 years later, the Commission released a report blasting the government for its handling of the Michael Gill incident. The report concluded that there had been a violation of human rights under Articles 4, 5, 7, 8, and 25 of the American Convention on Human Rights. The Commission recommended that the Jamaican government grant the petitioners an effective remedy, which includes the payment of compensation to Mr. Gill's next of kin. The DPP responded that the state had already apologized and paid the family $3 million. 20 years later, what are the lessons from the death of Michael Gill? Kelisha Williams for All Angles.
And obviously that in fact was not Mr. Ham, so my apologies. We'll hear from him a little bit later in the program. Let's go to our guest at this point and ask that question, in fact. What are the lessons? Mr. Small, let me start with you.
The lessons that you cannot ask police to investigate themselves. That is the main lesson, I think, that
Elaborate for us on what came out at the time that highlighted that so starkly.
They waited several days before they started investigating. He was killed at the hands of police officers and of soldiers. They killed him, and yet still, no person was identified as having inflicted any blow on him. No one was charged. Every one of those people who beat him mercilessly is walking free today. And it is a result of that, there's a long story leading up to it, but it's a result of that, the Indicom Act was passed, which took out of the hands of the security forces the power to investigate themselves, and also gave to Indicom numerous powers to require police officers and soldiers to explain their conduct while on duty.
What do you think, Dr. Gomes? What was it about this case? Because we've had so many in our history, you know. What was it about the Michael Gill case that you think especially helped to galvanize that change?
I think it was perhaps a happy confluence of the integrity and strength of character of the family, coupled with a new group that was able to discuss the circumstances and outline them in a way that the broader Jamaican society could see something was wrong there. And the persistence and the integrity of the people who worked on the case in the coroner's court all the way up to the coroner's courts and beyond. And the continuous exposure of the facts of the circumstances, the brutality of it, the horror of it, and the truth and integrity that poured out of Miss Jenny and her family every time they spoke. And perhaps the value that Jamaicans for Justice brought to it was the ability to then get her on the media, to have her words translated into the papers as a press release, to be able to raise the awareness of the society of Michael Gill as a man, of the injustice to the family, and to make him a person and that demanded attention. And kudos to the media. You all followed it. You followed it right through the coroner's inquest, right through everything that happened, so that people were kept aware of the steps in it, of the reality of it, of the horror of it, and perhaps that touched people.
Mr. Chateau, significance from your perspective. I know that the Indicom commissioner wrote an op-ed in the Gleaner speaking about the significance of the case in the formation of Indicom.
Yes.
But at a time when Indicom gets so much criticism. What does this case, you think, say about the importance of needing to form that organization?
Well, one of the things that stands out for me and for us at Indicom about Michael Gale is what was not done. When one reads the report from the commission, that's the Inter-American Commission, there are so many things that were not done. For example, the preservation of the scene, accountability. The court found that it was only August 9, it was 7:30 p.m. when he went down to the barricade at Olympic Gardens. It was clear in the report that he was mentally ill, but it was only not until September 9 that an account was given by the JDF. Not to mention that no statements were forthcoming from the JCF. So a lot was not done. There was actually no investigation done. The state accepted liability, but there was really no transparent and impartial investigation as the state was trying to claim. So that was significant. In addition to that, he was also guns were used to hit him as well. No potential exhibits apparently were recovered and preserved for evidential and probative value.
The issue of the preservation of the scene, let me ask you that one, because I still hear people asking questions about that. Are we where we should be?
We are miles ahead of Michael Gale. And I tell you what.
Except that's a really low bar.
I'm sorry?
Yeah. That's a really low bar, though, because right there we're nowhere. We're rock bottom with that.
I'll be very honest with you. There is one challenge, and that is Indicom is never present when the actual incident takes place. So there is that time lapse. However, we do have the legislative framework that says that we have primacy. And so realistically, the police has to preserve, as far as that can work, has to preserve that scene. They cannot, well, apart from moving the person, the police will say that they have a right to try and preserve life. So they will move the person and take them to the hospital. But outside of that, the scene is Indicom scene. And that, Dion, is why I say it's miles ahead of where we were. Because back in the day, as you can imagine, there was a scene where if police discharged their weapons once upon a time, where would the casings be? There would be no accountability. So there would be no onus or obligation of them to even preserve the scene or wait until we get there before any man acts.
Hold that thought for me. Let's go to the break. And then when we come back, we are going to hear from Michael Gale's brother. We'll come back to our guests after that. Stay with us. Remember, our hashtag is TVJ All Angles.